Thanks to everyone here for your interest in this book, and to so many of you who are here for your direct support in its gestation and its publication. This has not been a solitary exercise by any stretch of the imagination. Thanks also to Azad and the 87 Press for organizing this evening. I'm really grateful to you. I'm going to begin today with a quote from Mendelssohn. I have never described myself as an anarchist and can only make sense of the term in the nominative and confine it to paper. Why? Paper can sustain chaos, life cannot. I quite like the tidy didacticism of this last sentence, so at odds with its substance. Paper can sustain chaos, life cannot. This sentence speaks to Mendelssohn's faith in the material expanses of page and canvas, a faith exceeding her trust in the complexities of human experience, interaction, and politics. If paper can sustain chaos, Mendelssohn pushed this logic to the limit in her daily practice, writing and drawing near constantly, acquiring and accumulating vast quantities of paper. For Mendelssohn, all paper was potential manuscript, be it published book, recycled envelope, pizza box lining, or one of her nearly 800 notebooks. After Mendelssohn died on the 16th of November 2009, 5 of her friends, Lynne Harries, Kate Wheel, Peter Riley, Martin Tom, and Nigel Wheel, spent the winter that followed excavating the garden shed where she lived in Cambridge. Mendelssohn lived in paper. In winter 2010, I visited Peter Riley to ask about Mendelssohn's archive, now packed into 86 boxes and kept in a storage facility paid for by her friends. Peter and I drank tea and talked about approaching Mendelssohn's children, who proved generously prepared to donate the entirety to Sussex Special Collections. Then I went to head librarians at Sussex, Fiona Courage, Jane Harvell, and asked if they might consider taking on this archive. They were encouraging. In 2010, the University of Sussex officially acquired all 100 linear shelf feet of Mendelssohn's papers, as well as her collection of oil paintings. Mendelssohn disliked computers, so this archive is a contemporary rarity. Existing entirely on paper and canvas, it is the last of its kind. The word archive derives from the Greek arche, a term referring to commencement or origins. Archives store our past. They tell us about our beginnings. The Greek word arche refers also to commandment, to the law. It is related to the Greek archaion, the house or address of male superior magistrates, archons. Within their residence or archaion, official documents were filed, watched over, and interpreted. Archives then emerge from a paternalistic tradition, are places of law and order, of imposed cultural values and system. Anna Mendelssohn loathed paternalistic tradition. She articulates often how misogyny destroys peaceful nature. She comments often on the male resistance to female intelligence, to the woman's mind. The page that sustains chaos is, for Mendelssohn, a space that permits anarchy, the absence of imposed authority, system, or law. For Mendelssohn, the page was liberation, reason for being. It's those thin lines of thought onto paper which are my raison d'etre. Now, over a decade into my own commitment to this archive, I never cease to be astounded by how malleable the page becomes in Mendelssohn's hands. The page yields to her vision, her feeling, and most importantly, her capacious and unstinting relationship with language. The French philosopher Jacques Derrida famously identified archives as a site of contagion, breeding grounds for what he called archive fever. This fever is the passion we come to feel for the archive, our drive to understand and know it in full, replete clarity, a drive completely at odds with the truths of archival incompletion and disorder. Archives have been described as living bodies that can beguile, run feral, and need taming, or at the very least, a good combing. Archives have been likened to beasts marked by stutters and silences, to complex systems of enunciability. Archival documents can bleed copiously, demand our assessment, our urgent discernment. Whatever the project is, work in the archives requires a triage, a separation of documents. Planning tonight's event took me back to the start of my own relationship with Mendelssohn's archive, the very first days where I sat in Sussex Special Collections with a select one or two of those 86 uncatalogued boxes and tried to make sense of their contents to triage Mendelssohn's work. I'm going to show you some examples of the kinds of things you might see were you to come and visit Mendelssohn's archive. Now I'm going to tell you some of the things that I observed and made notes about in those first few days that I spent with Mendelssohn's boxes. So these are notes from my first rummage around in the boxes of Mendelssohn's uncatalogued and disorganized archive. And here's the things I found. A certificate reading Heaton Mersey Music Festival, first prize awarded to Anne Mendelssohn for elocution, open blank verse, under 21, 1965. An unsent postcard reading, I'm supposed to relate. It didn't used to be such an effort. Prison issue notebooks. Part of a draft letter to Robin Blackburn, one-time editor of the New Left Review, reading, it was embarrassing for me to stand trial for what I thought was counterproductive to expanding education for the working classes in this country. A cue card reading, for I do not wish to hear how Virginia Woolf arrived at orgasm, dominated by a language dislocated from my own experience as though it were a prerequisite for excellent writing. This is what I think of as Mendelssohn's genteel lady voice. Loose leaf extensive handwritten notes on the following subjects. The trombone, the romantic English landscape artist John Constable, troubadour poets, Homer, Nabokov, Browning, Coleridge, Eliot, Hansarp, Benjamin, H.D., and William Carlos Williams, Susan Brown Miller's Against Our Wishes, Bruno Nettles' The Study of Ethnomusicology, Arcis and Thesis, Silphium. There were numerous unsent letters in this archive to people such as fellow poets Denise Riley and Rod Mengham, to Mendelssohn's children, Poppy and George. One letter I note in my first notes from this archive ends as follows. P.S. This is my new charming daughter, Self. Will you edit my poetry after I die? Poppy, only if it's very good. Otherwise, I'll put a bullet through it. Sweet. I think I should note that that sweet is probably pretty sincere, actually. I found a single piece of pink paper reading Ambushed by Technical Parasites, My Own Story by Ms. A. Mendelssohn. I now know this to be part of Mendelssohn's episodic Roman à clef, 2 decades in the writing. A photocopy of her one-off book, I'm Working Here, by Grace Lake, dedicated to Tom Rayworth and written in 1983. This was one of the first Mendelssohn manuscripts that I came across. Its firstness I had forgotten about until this past week, in fact. At Sussex, we only hold a photocopy of this book. And I was always concerned that it was not complete, that I didn't have the whole book. At dinner at Val Rayworth's about 2 years ago, Val pulled the original, the only copy of this book that exists, from a pile in her living room to show it to me. Thinking that I might be interested, it's safe to say that I was. Always eluding their own call to system, archives happily confirm serendipity, chance encounter. So here I am still in this first day or two in the archive. I'm observing hundreds of pen and ink drawings, which I soon discovered run like a torrent through the archive entire. I also log notebooks full of quotations, notes, and poems. Here are some of the poem titles that I copied down in those first couple of days. To Mickey Machismo, who screened me out from a more attractive man last night. Libretto, guided hand. That is what I detested about you. And in turn, the disturbances. Into the tube, upsy eye, a bit urgent. Pens, syringes, and the stars. Trouble mentor, misplate, roll a letter, roll. Tackle Meredith, lambs on both sides. Prince Charming found this and wept. And lastly, a tasty biscuit. Next to which I find I write assiduously a poem in 4 parts. The canny among you will note that not one of these poems appears in the book that we're celebrating this evening, which in fact contains only about 2 to 5% of the total amount of poetry that Anna Mendelssohn wrote. As I neared the end of the first days spent documenting this collection, I detect within my notes a palpable sense of overwhelm. To quote a Mendelssohn poem, I can see that I was chugging down the river of despair. In order to catalog this archive, I needed to speak knowledgeably to its contents in elaborate funding proposals. In order to prove the importance of this archive, I needed to systematize it in ways that would permit my certain informed return to its particularities. And everywhere in this archive are incredible provocations that distract, demand reiteration, resuscitation, or some equally urgent treatment, triage. It took me 5 years to secure funding for this archive to get it cataloged. Now it is the most visited archive at Sussex Special Collections. Mendelssohn's papers are requested more than those of Leonard Woolf or Virginia Woolf. In 2015, the year that we cataloged it, I spent 1 day each week working alongside Simon Coleman, the intrepid archivist we eventually hired. Simon could catalog a decade's worth of notebooks in a working day. In the same time span, I'd have read through 1 or 2 of the 800 on offer. I'm going to give you now an example of what I think of as a Mendelssohn provocation. This is a really typical Mendelssohn scrap, one of thousands in the archive. I'm going to hone in on one bit of this little scrap. I often come up against the shape of my own body now when I write. Further down the page, Mendelssohn likens her body to an archaic sacrificial site. And still further down the page, she writes, "We are no good any longer at writing." This scrap transitions from an I attempting to write to a we that says it cannot, although it does keep writing. The writerly I bumps up against the body's ungainliness, its ineradicable contours. This embodied self is defined by the past, it's archaic. This embodied self is expendable material, a potential sacrifice for a good that might not be its own. To write with or in spite of this body is, for Mendelssohn, an execution, an enactment, but also a death of sorts. In recognizing the obstructed body, Mendelssohn finds she can no longer write well, but as part of this recognition, her I becomes a multiple we. We are no good any longer at writing. Acknowledging her material-lived subjectivity, this author proliferates selves, but also loses her authorial capacity, her creativity. Mendelssohn, in other words, evokes an ambivalence about the corpus, one that runs through the corpus that is her archive. In my very first sets of notes about Mendelssohn's papers, I dutifully observed that she was reading French feminism at the University of Cambridge in 1985. Her reading included Hélène Cixous. In Cixous' famous essay, The Laugh of the Medusa, women are encouraged to break out of the snare of silence and write against the phallocentric tradition. For Cixous, women can become escapees of that tradition by writing through and from the bodies they've been taught to loathe. For Cixous, the female body is the site of good revolution and even better writing. A woman without a body, dumb, blind, can't possibly be a good fighter. She is reduced to being the servant of the militant male, his shadow. More so than men who are coaxed toward social success, toward sublimation, women are body, hence more writing. Mendelssohn shares Cixous' desire to augment the audibility of the female writer's voice, yet she remains a fierce Cartesian dualist, privileging mind always over cellular matter. Consider, I have withdrawn my body for a long time now. Sometimes I go like a ghost, having to pull myself back into stiff body. To the American poet Ed Dorn, Mendelssohn writes with uncharacteristic shyness about how she never felt comfortable calling herself a poet, but could always be a poetess in my mind. In a letter to a friend, she writes, "Men act as though they own the poetic mind." In prison in 1974, Mendelssohn writes in her journal, "Your mind misses you, love." Prison, Mendelssohn recalls as a place where she was defined by body and could never bring hard thinking to fruition. In 1986, she writes, "These vertical bars, all leads to body." Like Cixous, Mendelssohn longs to be an escapee, careering intelligently and autonomously along the expanse of the page. Mendelssohn regularly pitched her mind against patriarchal law, written always with a capital L. But unlike Cixous, Mendelssohn values the female mind above all else. She sides, I would argue, with Gerard Manley Hopkins' paean to the sublimities of the same. Oh, the mind has mountains. Anna Mendelssohn concurs, there is no room for anything to be taken from. Mine was mind, long roads up into the mountains. There's a conservatism at work in Mendelssohn's fidelity to the mind. Consider high culture and low culture, the mind and the people. But there's a creative escapism too, a realm of real possibility that, as for Hopkins, acts as a catharsis against that chugging river of despair. For like Hopkins, Mendelssohn is often pitched past pitch of grief, anticipating pangs that will, schooled at four pangs, wilder ring the mourning body. As for Hopkins, Mendelssohn's despair is fueled by lost affiliation, lost faith, grief about the self made tragic through circumstances beyond control, and more tragically still, well within control. As Mendelssohn writes, her mind was met by text that held her. In space, she could find nowhere else to control. One day she believes that she exists in the mind of God, that the sky hold her in simple, hard labor, that the text has been divided into single weights, that the burdens she is detailed to lift are the words of her former pages. Anna Mendelssohn left behind thousands of sheets that hold our attention, sheets now measured and cataloged and subjected to the imposition of order that is the book we're celebrating today. The book is an attempt to make material the flights of Mendelssohn's intellection and feeling. A gracious reading of its heft might be that it aims to meet the parameters of Mendelssohn's extraordinary mind. As Mendelssohn writes in a poem, the bigger the books, the better. In practice, this book aims to map Mendelssohn's work on her own complex terms. 10 years in the making, I am aware that this book remains incomplete and insufficient to its task. That said, this archive has been, for me, monumental privilege and keen obligation. This archive has been a site of untold sadness, as on the day I came across Mendelssohn's last poems, written in an intensely shaky yet determined hand. This archive has made me laugh, it has made me furious, it has cultivated my love, it has cultivated my loyalty. Mendelssohn's archive assuredly elicits fever, a fever I've seen replicated in the students who worked alongside me in the book's later stages, Sinead Rawson, Sulette Ali, and George Clutterbuck. And I would ask you to behold the beautiful detail of George's color-coded notes of my editorial work. Mendelssohn's archive, erudite, intensely creative, impossibly and unreliably repetitive, demands respect and patience. A patience echoed by the kind peers who pored over the introduction to this volume, Alistair Davies, Ian Patterson, Romana Huck, and Sam Ladkin. This patience re-emerged in the stalwart perseverance exhibited by Tony Fraser of Shearsman Books, who repeatedly addressed my lengthy list of edits in the 40-some times we passed these 800 pages back and forth in the last months before publication. My poetry books were sacred, Mendelssohn writes in another poem. Sacred or otherwise, this poetry book is dedicated to Mendelssohn's children, to whom it belongs, and to whose representative, Poppy O'Shaughnessy, we will now turn. My thanks to all of you for listening.
Hi, hello everyone. Wow, amazing, Sarah. Thank you so much. This book is so important. It's heavy, and it is also incredibly balanced. And it's a celebration of Anna's work and her process as an artist. I'm speaking on behalf of my sister Emerald and my brother George, and we feel immense gratitude to Sara, who, it's been such a long journey, but from the moment we met Sara, it's been such a joy. We have loved our communication with her and sharing our memories of Anna, learning so much as well from Sara about Anna and understanding her in a different way. When I hold this book, as I do often, I feel as if I'm holding a lot of the work that we found in her garden shed after she died, when she Thank you so much for your integrity and for your determination, and above all for your kindness and deep understanding that you've shown my brother, sister, and I along this process. And most importantly, thank you for your dedication to representing Anna in all of her colours. And I've really enjoyed learning with you, and I know that Emmy and George also feel the same. And I've also, we're so proud of Anna. We're so proud of her work, and we are so humbled to see Anna's legacy. So just huge thanks. And finally, I just want to remind you that the donations from this event will go to the fantastic charity who support children and families whose parents are imprisoned. So if you're not able to donate today, please share with your network. But yeah, thank you so much, Sara. And thank you for everyone for joining. And we're really excited. And George and I are so excited to hear your words and you reading her poetry. It's fantastic. Thank you.
I thought that I would just talk very briefly. I thought I'd talk about Anna in Cambridge, and obviously that was a huge part of her whole creative life. So on the kind of thing that Sara suggested, really, that in some ways your materiality is also your body, is also your space. I thought I would talk about when I first where she was living through, which was always a precarious thing through her time in Cambridge up to her death. And also for those of us who are older, perhaps we remember some of these things, or for younger it might be interesting. And of course also the thing that much now does not remain, much remains but much doesn't remain, of the materiality of that world. I first met her, I happened to live in Chesterton Road, and I had been in Clare, and purely by, not totally chance, but nothing to do with me, she first came up to Cambridge to study for the entrance exam in the autumn. And she was in St. Regis, which was a sort of landmark building as in the periphery of Cambridge. It was a huge white, one of those ship-like interwar buildings with metal windows and a sort of curved frontage, and those kind of rational sort of sub-modernist flats inside, with a bit like Poirot, with all the rubbish chutes and things that lead to so much trouble. And she had, again, she had done what she always did, which was to sort of throw this huge veil of her personality over everything. It was just like reading a novel, a character in Henry James or Edith Wharton, you know, you were just knocked out by the stacks of painting, the stacks of books, the musical instruments, and her own appearance, which was very bonny and robust. She was 5 months pregnant, and very beautiful. The good thing about this place for both of us was that it was, you walk down Chesterton Road, down the backs, and you're at the University Library. And she was often to be seen in some really amazing 80s coats and things, her head held high, and various hats and briefcases and umbrellas and all sorts of things, walking down to the UL. And those flats have now been demolished and replaced with something more, I'm sure, more sound. And the UL, of course, the University Library hasn't changed an enormous amount, except that it used to, it's been infilled like lots of buildings like the British Museum. The tea room used to be in the centre, and we spent very many happy hours there under the magnolia tree, which was right at the very centre. That's now all vanished. The cafe was much, I'm sure people still enjoy the UL cafe, but in those days it was much less formal. You could group into smaller groups and talk for a long time. And there was a sort of wire and glass cage inside it, which was for smokers, where Anna always was, and where, like all good feminists, she was bawled out by another good feminist as a trollop and a disgrace in a sort of turning point of her life. The next place I remember her was a house with a studio. She was very anxious about being safe, even at St. Regis, which had been very difficult to arrange for her, as she had no status in the university or connection to Clare or whatever at the time. She complained quite soon about the flat she had and was moved to another better one at the back of the building. And this was a very nice house, but she was already losing it a bit. You know, that her son had been born, she was expecting Emerald. She was finding it very hard to sort of keep up with most of it. But one thing that I do remember was that she had in the back kitchen, where there would once have been a range or a boiler, she had a little desk that was covered with books and drawings and writing. And in the plaster above her head, in the sort of arch of the brick, she had written hundreds of little lines of poetry. Some I remembered, some I think she'd made up, and marked them all up. She was teaching herself scansion, and she covered them with the sort of prosody marks. And that reminded me very much of kind of being a grammar school girl with homework, and of it being a small private space. And that house was sold to become the photographer's gallery, but was no longer exists. It's now like a private house. And there were other places. She always wanted to kind of insert herself into places she felt safe. And this was usually a kind of middle-class idyll, really, of piano and garden and bookcases. And of course, you know, there are many people who can't afford that. There were lots of occasions when she stayed in people's houses while they were on sabbatical or at Christmas or in holidays, and she would make herself at home and she would perk up a bit. She liked to entertain their friends who she couldn't otherwise entertain with some variously successful cooking. But there was always friction. There was always something wrong. There was always the restlessness. She wanted a piano, and I think when she got a piano, they asked her to play it in the day when they were out, and she was very, she then made a thing that she had to play the piano at night. That's very much the kind of situation that went on. And I think in throwing in her lot with Franck and Ling, who were her landlords till she died, she found somewhere where she felt safe. But she was far then from the traditional centre of Cambridge, the academic heart of Cambridge, though the UL continued to be her touchstone. And I had left the sort of agreeable Dons area I had lived in, and I was living in the south of Cambridge, and it was pretty dreary, you know, in terms of it, far from the river, far from any academic buildings or whatever, lots of interwar houses and never-ending roundabouts. And there was this kind of triangulation, really, especially at the end of her life, between my house at the sort of cheap end of Queen Edith's Way, her house on a sort of spoke off from the hospital roundabout, the hospital, and the nursing home where she spent the months, some months between being admitted to hospital and then being readmitted to hospital. I've sort of felt when I was putting this together, you know, it sounds as bit as that, she herself was physically much diminished. I started to see her, instead of seeing her walking her boldly along the road, she would be standing by the bus stop. She started to be less able to walk. We'd always given her a lot of lifts, but if my husband was away, I found I had to call her a taxi for quite a short way. She lived, again, because she was very anxious, she lived at not in the house, but in the place which Sarah's mentioned at the back of the house, which had been once a garage and then became a studio for her, and into which she decanted eventually almost the whole contents of her parents' house in Stockport. And this was where, after she died, we removed all her possessions. Her landlords had kept it unchanged in the 9 months of her illness, and then they very gratefully demolished it. And that's it. That was her last place.
Thanks very much indeed. And can I say thanks very much to Sarah and to Lynne for setting things out. And we're obviously here to mainly celebrate this publication, which has arrived at all our addresses thanks to the insane dedication of Sara Crangle and the insane altruism of Shearsman. It's an amazing thing to have happened. I'm just going to read 3 short poems from Tondo Aquatique, which Equipage brought out in 1997 and which I feel particularly attached to. And in Sarah's volume, they are pages 372, 373 and 376. 372. What we don't know and what we don't ask and where we are means to us is that specifically. We prefer to be, rather than not to be, trusted, to be believed, that we listened to despair and could not leave it there personally, despite our own powers of choice. And then I knew I could not die, and that was selfish. I don't deserve this rhapsody. I don't know whether I was right or wrong, but I don't see why I should be put through this hell either. This looking up and down, this resonant glancing into a camera. The merciless and literate have advised me of what they're about to do. I hope they find me tasty. The sound beyond the periphery is incessant. I want to analyze it. We write of sensitivity and are reviled for it. I never forget. But the sound of the machine roars into it. How many thousands of miles should we have to fly to petition against it? Or am I courteous and end up beneath the wheels of an oncoming truck? I don't know which colour to choose. The blue I dreamt is untranslatable. I sense the rote of priorities: food, clothes, shelter, culture, art. Bound around the room in fixed photographs, dishes are slammed down, another flash kidnap, strings tied enough to burn into the ingratitude I have been told that I have shown. Exposition, ingratitude. I am returned to the bowing and scraping sans violin. The monstrous regimen throws back its jaws. It has now become hell in full scenario. You were always vile, which I knew, which is why there is no reply plunged up to my repetitive role syndrome. The word is enough. I fit in. But the problem remains. How, without the Second World War, can I possibly, in the presence of relentless realism, get it right? And then finally, I am become my enemy whom I could not please, and am imagined to be whom I am not, for she was not me, although her interpretations suited her best. Should I have nowhere to lean my face except against the cup of the palm of this hand that hides the life I could not live, having fallen young into my mind, having fallen further than answers would give an astute reply to martial arms. Had I words I could confidently write and not be told that they were an excuse, I might find the time to warm into less fright. I try to confine my expansive capacity and am told that I am not known for my hospitality. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much to Sara for inviting me to come and read, and I do send out good wishes for Sandeep Parmar in hopes that she gets better. So I'll start with my Chekhov's Twilight World. This can only be a memory. Eviction by ideologists returned me to Chekhov's Twilight. It's the only Twilight I had, inevitably so, having lost late 19th century Russia. This is only a fraction of the wardrobe. Surface treatment, quite cool. I don't know what I think of wood painted white. It's difficult to transport furniture by hand on a boat with fires flaming behind you. It's very quiet here. We lived by a river. Since I was told that I hadn't read enough, I have interred myself behind books. I shall never consider that I have a cultural contribution to make to British culture again. I swear to that. Which year was Lorca here? I heard that he had been in New York. I don't touch other people's babies. I have a strong memory. We are not a completely conscious democracy, although we have the frameworks of democratic procedure, which should be recognized and practiced. It is no disgrace for a practicing artist to attend a formally chaired meeting on equal opportunities for women. Women can be disturbed by personal invasion from other women when the chair is ignored. One of the reasons why meetings are chaired is to contain and separate the personal emotions of each member of the meeting. I have attended many, many meetings which have all been chaired before my own reputation was damaged by people who refused to recognize the structural reasons for democratic procedure. That is, I do not appreciate being assaulted by gangsters' friends. Could we get that quite straight? My writing is not for them. It is a gutter lot who boast the sacrifices and struggles of the people, having done nothing but 4 years hard work. But we were not allowed to work. We were each of us spun out by those who claimed Chekhov's world for themselves. I was the first to go. 2 months at university and wham, eviction. This country was still in the throes of Wagnerianism. Check it. Pan and tilt, weft and warp. The earth does tilt. To define me as straight ignores the fact that my mother's family were Russian. Polish-Russian relations have had a painful history. I was in the pain of that history, and I knew to the last fiber of my body and soul. So whom you saw standing there without the faintest conviction, apart from the drag and pull of miscarriage, was a Pole from Seville. Methought I had a beard coming on. 'Twas so fulsome to be vomiting in pink darned socks with a field to plough. He threw me an orange from the hold of the boat belonging to the Spanish Navy. Oh, that's a lovely color combination. Shut up, they bellowed. You're up the show. Hick hock honk trally lamplight. That's a terrible thing to say about anyone. Where is my Grundig tape recorder? Be very, very careful who you talk to, live with, work with. There is disregard for human life, and there should not be. I can't be everywhere ensuring that no harm is done. My poetry is not the harmful type. It stems from the affections, not their antithesis. Where I came from, one requested a license to write. One did not suddenly snatch momentum. At each stage, there are moral considerations. Before the Equal Opportunities Act became law over 20 years ago, women were at a decided disadvantage. There is no question about that. It is absolutely and incontrovertibly true. I live my life. I don't have 2 lives or 5 or 9. I have 1 life, my own. And what I decide to do with my life is a matter between myself, my mind, and the law. I did not decide to read law. I considered it. Buildings are neat. I like buildings. I considered architecture too, even more so than the law. I doubted that the law was pure. And from Viola Tricolor. The past's stranding to belief, adduced reconnaissance facing, fraught dance negating, reply in plenary session full stating, ambulesque and takes one hand to trace, no known condiment. Ring-a-ring, hearts are breaking slowly, rain hurts autumn, selected missiles forestalled for false confession is not. Good question is who, and too many regrets too many regrets half served by good and bad. Painted on with a minuscule brush, 2 visiting slippers, a corner stamp, enlarged emerald monuments before a fire screen wrought in crimson and gold, a Persian pair in gendered nightcaps cooled by mosaic buffaloes. In enthusiastic twilight, white moons enclose the radiating lemons, dissipating gloom arched as dust becomes a glory flung, and fading charms, more charming still than forward-looking Fothergill. Death is a miserable vision of ice and of rain, of selflessness, of kindness, of smiles in the depths of pain, of courage. No medals are cut for death, compressed into ugly taunts of ugliness, unfit for the propagation of nationhood. Death in the excrement of others. He wrote me this letter to tell me the truth of what was in store from the man from Duluth. Waste grounds, parking lots, invitations to retreats, signing communications with a knife between their teeth. They're all the same, maim, blame. And that's the way it swung back. Pendulum, pendular, tantalizing visuality, materializing love, objects here and objects there, weighing, equating, valuing, an opposition in accord, a final licensed wit. Dear Chaos. We can't make our world go right. 3 jigsaws in tumbled out glory. Birds chip in at the sky, a few who were weasels now. Screams on wings. The tick in your eye I told you was a butterfly is now your pet, invisible, secure. Landing in luxurious poems, a soft tower of unused bubble bath with its lid on, unlike the disinfectant. Disinfect this poem. It had a baby lying in it when suddenly out of the sky fell a torrent of brown disinfectant, missing her hands, missing her face and hands, missing her face and hands. She misses her mother. This is all chaos. It's the city's modern face. Chunks out here and there in the city's modern room, where robots know the routine in the city's roomy mess. No citizen is left. And I think I'll just tack on one of my own poems, which I think kind of may fit here. Virulent inanition. And there's this person whose teeth disappear on a daily basis, sometimes all at once, or one or two every few hours or seconds, but always by night they return. The ever-repeating circumstance of hell, the ever lather of red milk and gums of every wailing be-fevered. Every bruise it bursts, boils, blisters. Volcanic cunts across her jaw floor. There is only one set of teeth, but they disappear, return, disappear, come back, then pop. Purgatorial rock crushes Kelsic, now split centers revealed. It hurts, it's painless. She never complains, but always screams as they melt or evaporate or even shatter by the hammer of Lord Hag of the Midnight Manor. It steals her hair for its mouth. It drops her a poultry of polished iron circles for taken incisors. But her hair it will not stick and the teeth disappear. Her hair it will not stick and the teeth disappear. They return to the person, they fever in the person. On a daily basis they return, they disappear, and the coins, they scratch her face. Thank you.
The first poem I'm reading is from the middle of the section of Tondo Aquatique that Rod read. It's the poem that begins, it's page 374 if you're following along at home. No mixing, not cake, yes, cake, or anything that is being spoken, enter not. Invite the lamppost for tea and his friend Victory, quote. She was always a bit touched. She talks to inanimate objects in the hope that they won't be mistaken. For conspirators live in teacups, and most of those have been broken, end quote. You cannot imagine this, and I hope that you will never have to experience the perversity of being suspected of having something about you. The rules are not available, and having no sense, I am found reading negative dialectics in laundry rooms, talking to sheets that take on a life of their own through the inspirational properties of starch and the light freight of chartered flight. We sing, ooh, this world is unrecognizable. And there is no reply to what does not exist that cannot lie again. Means limited to impressions of life and death, in frames stabbed for new entertainments, heavier objects. I'm going to read the second piece of Anna's I'm going to read is In the Minority of One, which is, I think it's 497 in the collected. I'm going to read it from the publication of it from the paper novelist because my arm is in a bad way. In the Minority of One. She would talk forever, her body slobby, she had been caught. Slobby, she was stunned. Another death of hers, no one else. She was killing each of the people they had told her she was. She was not addressed as one, she was told she was plural. You, plural, they said. You, plural. Pluie, she would fight for a touch of the drizzling rain. In those days, they locked it out. She told the time. She tied her own laces. She walked out with her notebook and sketching paper. She was a low-brained slob, they said, and her body slobby. Go steal, go appropriate. Or was it expropriate? Her light went out. She was caught in a house. It belonged to the local council. She was plain, dressed by a Quakeress, hemline below the knee. She liked her books. She was not armed with regressive retorts. Her hands were an artist's, her piano 189 miles away. It fell to her to suffer. If she died, too bad. She can't remember the pain in her mind wrapped her skull tightly. She had to lay down. They said, fight for murderers, fight for thieves, defriend your strangler. There were too many people to fit into her, but not hers any longer. She had to be girthed. Were they her parents? Oh no, though they would not believe it. They were the great who disliked. Their great fat paws and claws came pulling. What were her levels of tolerance of primitivity? None. She totally horrified. Bringing her disgust into exploration of Christian culture, she was vague. Could only give what she had away for nothing. Was this the jubilance of Jesuitry that searched for gold, that the child out of her care was made to go searching for treasure? We were not pirates. She was kidnapped onto another boat. A friend's life cut out by a motorbike. Crashing. There were no happy times. One, found briefly by Holland Park, a school to her left. Quiet. Street. Sun. Sunday. Should he chase her again, was she to sprint? Where were her papers, her Merleau-Ponty? She had to have something. She could not have nothing. She moved very carefully. Crashed her skull. Was swimming in the sun. What were there no responses? Was it general? No one could be delicate north then. It was story time. She doesn't want to talk anymore. Why did she talk then? They were trying to structure her responses, shift her away from poetry. Wholly dying. She recognized the shape of the interior and is still continually petrified of being evident. They hated here, and I don't, and didn't. I know, but there are other things, buildings and distances. I was not identified by self. This is why women should stop accusing me. I can't stand emotional wrangling. I don't like power, and don't want it. I just don't suffer fools gladly. But who was I to denounce them? In the minority of one. That is how it will ever be. Stop whipping up advances to victory. Hurt. Symbols don't apply. Cut me dead as often as you want to. Tactics are not cross-hatchable. The children of Quakers run from everywhere, afraid of being human, a meaning focused upon with what fury will rarely be told and what remains untold. For she was goodness, my mother herself, stripping down in preparatory fever for the move from dungeon to cell. And the soul novel, quite conscious, was the one that no one should read who does not wish to be convulsed with the legible guilt of folly. A way around the entrance to the gulf into which the daughter of Phaedon was harried, in case she wrote an inadequate reflection of the disappointment that was her creation. The Wotherings shed. I don't know enough to write. It is bad as writing anything recognizable. How could you? How could you? In a temper, ruin everything so dreadfully mine. You didn't care. They were your people. You could target through every life. I don't understand you. I don't understand. No one is going to be dead. But to turn on me later and to pull me to pieces, a bullet audibly hurtling through my head. You can love me mysteriously, or all of this was closed to me. One is profoundly photographed by language. I'm going to finish with 3 short niners. Sure, with your meager hoarded fragment of earth, gold store your germs and spoils defended. from the right to roam, the decayed and undead. We declared centuries buckled in such violent, torn and shredded viral logic, its impossible defense. Hands shatter the perimeter. We, the invisible, streets strewn with feathers, our solitude, negative reveries, vibrant, squatting schools and rulings, your nights ripped by fire. Disinvest, Ed, the deep in particular of fleshes, our memory embodied, itching, wet on the Union Jack. Your truths will be rerouted. On the stand, list your horrors. Proclamations and divestments, pour blood from the crown and ideo, your archaic printed murders, bludgeon civic lies to this day. Against the name of your inflictions, your rubble and basic hatred, turn hands to gather. Stolen our lives and back bodies. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here this afternoon for me, evening for most of you all. I have to say, I feel right off the bat that I didn't know Anna, obviously. My interaction and engagement with her work has been entirely through the effort of Sara, who not only introduced me to Anna through her work in publishing this edited volume, but also gave me a sense of what kind of a maker Anna was in terms of her multimedial, constantly textually experimental project. Which feels in so many ways intellectually tentacular. So for somebody like myself, who's coming at it, coming at the project as a kind of evocation of an archive, I'm really mesmerized by Sara's courage to take on the difficulty of processing such an archive, and also, more specifically in that, considering, the difficulty of deciding what is a poem. Just looking at the archive and seeing the illustrative work, seeing the prosaic work bleeding and blending into the what finally gets normalized, constituted as poem on the page. It seems like it was kind of a difficult thing. How do you decide where a poem begins and where a poem ends? And that question very much interests me as a scholar of the literatures and cultures of the Americas, where so much of what is poetry is not alphabetically inscribed, but bleeds into pictography, picture writing, oral poetry, prose, storytelling. There isn't this easy segmentation of a poem on the page. So I assume it was a tremendous effort conceptually to decide, well, what are the poems that make up a collection of poems? And also just absolutely tantalizing. It must have been absolutely tantalizing to consider, instead of a book, something like a digital edition, where you can experience the fullness of this archive as far as I understand it from afar. So congratulations to Sara, congratulations to Anna's family, and I will read 2 or 3 little bits of poetry. One, a poem from Anna that I was really struck by, particularly not so much the poem and its title or even what the poem was about, which did strike me, but the dating, which was October 1983. Oh yes, we are entitled Mohican slaves, which is a poem about colonialism. And when you think about the dating of the poem, October 1983 is on page 165 of the new book. When you think about the dating of the poem, for me at least, you got to consider that October is the month in which Columbus Day is celebrated. And as somebody who has myself worked with the archives of Christopher Columbus through a dream project that I'll say something more about after I read the poem, it resonated with me that maybe this poem was written on Columbus Day. And maybe it was a way of processing the intellectual legacy, let's say, contamination of colonialism. And that's why I chose to read it tonight. So, oh yes, we are entitled Mohican Slaves. Simple Christopher cooled her hair, decided several times hidden that had to be, and changed that. Changed simple, changed utterly decided. Marked for life who said, reveal your voice, ka, naka, 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 na, for truth is unknown out of science's deposit. That journey was the one after the eclogues over equals nothing id happening idiot. He slumped, slobbered, slimmed, slummed, whilst thick I waved his hand. Whatever you were before, to me you are not now. Longer that the grab for an old shore, after line, after memorable. I don't care, he said, and meant it. Then there were others who had polemical belts, talking 10 to the dozen, slammed, slumped, marched, hoisted flags, reached a sky one day in nowhere. Wrote in a backyard, heard spirits yell, Marty, Marty, gone to the Skundarp, gone to Southern, gone. Miserable, enervating misery, mystery. Do they score though? They do not score, no. They join though, perhaps, without speaking golf courses, you ding on the lullaby. I love that poem. I heard its music when I first read it. And it connected with me because, and I'm going to read some of my own poems, a couple of my own poems. I've also written a book on Columbus, the Journals of Christopher Columbus, Skins of Columbus, in which I decided, I set upon exploring the colonial subconscious. What that means is for, and first of all, I understand the colonial subconscious as different from the Freudian subconscious. That is not like, an individual reticulated in something like universal mytheme, but more like mind as impacted by history. Subconscious as conditioned by its historical context. So I felt that it should be possible that through my dreaming, I ought to access some of my history. So for the 4 months during which Christopher Columbus traveled the coast of the Americas, I read his journal entries before going to sleep at night, thinking intently on the symbols, images, landscapes, figures, tropes, willing myself to dream this book. Notes throughout the night recorded my dreams, and in the days I wrote the poems and the essays and made the collages that make up this book, Skins of Columbus, which I feel is wonderfully consonant with the poem I just read. Oh yes, we are entitled Mohican Slaves. And I'll read 1 or 2 of these very short poems, and then maybe I'll read some of my new poetry, a new creation story that I've been working on. Creation story for contemporary times. Sunday, Thursday, October 11th. I suppose I should explain that the titles, the days on the titles are different because they distinguish the day of October 11th as Columbus experienced it from the day on which October 11th fell when I was reading his dream journals in 2015. So it's 1492, 2015. So Sunday, 1492, October 11th, Thursday, 2015, October 11th. Roughest sea so far, tube-nosed seabirds on green reeds, a cane, a stick bobbing carved irons in a small board with marks like lizard hands, like little lights at the end of a hall signaling pigs to squeal hopes of land. Through day we landed and saw the lizards upright like sideways F's or Y's upside down, crimping their necks to look at us. Impossible words by force, by fish chopping the water around us all. My Christ, my surrendering fish, I see what you signal to take the dinosaurs by force. Tuesday, Saturday, October 13. To a broken planet came men, bellies and long hair, carved like spears, all wet, all playing games. They are a pleasure to watch, so flat, so slender, so fast. They split my world into a dead body hiding in my skin. Wednesday, Sunday, October 14. The island sick, fearful shouts to us, coming from heaven for help to us. And the last one from this series that I will read. Friday and Saturday, Tuesday and Wednesday, October 16. Watching an airplane crash feels like is like what I feel watching their canoes off the coast, subtending, making wobbly half circles inside me, bags of human shit hanging from my lungs. I don't know how to describe it. The explosive fire across the water. Have you ever seen a plane crash? I haven't, but I fear what it feels like seeing all those people dip down. And I will close by reading a new poem from this Story of Creation, new book of poetry called Zaya. And when I say that it's a creation story for contemporary times, what I am referring to is that it is a creation story that emerges from emergency, from crisis, from devastation, apocalypse, and in that regard, it finds its intellectual sources in such creation stories as the Popol Vuh, the Kitchenmeister creation Popol Vuh, Milton's Paradise Lost, the Navajo Dine Bahana, Epic of Gilgamesh, yes, The Changing Light at Sandover. And the book is structured in 3 sections, 9 cantos each canto 9 stanzas long, 5-line long stanzas, and written in iambic pentameter. So it's kind of total symmetry. And this is the 5th canto, called A Quieter Register Than the Skin, the lightning, the flood. Over and over again, and we are flooded, and we are crushed, and we are blistered and bit by the bugs and burnt by the flint and gouged like resin and rained upon every night in storms that blind us with flashing electricity like jaguars crushing skulls with their teeth or tearing tendons into strips in which maybe you notice the gleam of joy to be in that moment amidst that which you love most, your people, your things. Maybe they even say, we will eat you, we will try you in our mouths and tear you up. Your flesh is paste, and it is time for us to dance and climb and flatten you with our flames. And that's okay, it is their time. and you love these little words more than anything in the world. So you are demolished, you are bent down, you are half dead on the hillside in the highest feelings of life itself. You are ruined and completely ready. And in that way, one day you appear to yourself to be a kind of monkey. That's right, you become a child of the woods again, framed by the sag of your own heaving limbs, and you swing like hell through the trees to stay in this fire of arrival, and your heart almost flees your chest for fear of missing the dawn. You howl then like an anxious dog. It is beautiful and makes sense, like words on a page, like a mistake that won't fall away, and your hand comes under the scrutiny of so much time, toppled and crushed, it shakes and it bends, and then you feel as if you can touch 2 times or 3. Faraway times cry out to you with your thick brow in the vanished air, with your eyes wandering in the warm light, with your thoughts dogged by stars, shining rocks. And then you feel as if you can take the flood face on, plexus tilted to the sky, in outstretched fingers, plain as syllables, reaching in 2 or 3 directions at once. How could you not perceive we were behind you then? How did you not hear the gnashing? And when our tongues as hot as coals snuck under your velvet feet, did you not fidget, skulk and sneak, tighten your toes and clench your teeth? You were like a cloud then, filled with light, but you confused the lightning for the dawn. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Azad. I'm just trying to see my way into this. I hope that I'm visible and audible as well. Great. The first thing I just wanted to register was that I don't think that the corpus of a poet's work has ever arrived with such éclat since Donald Allen's edition of the collected poems of Frank O'Hara, which was pretty much which was exactly 50 years ago. This is an extraordinary editorial achievement, and Sara is hugely to be congratulated, and also Shearsman for its enterprise. After all, the O'Hara poems had the funding of Knopf behind them, and for a small press to achieve this is really extraordinary. I've been enjoying hearing Anna's poems read by other poets, and also thinking about how the idioms of those poets I can hear meeting Anna's work. I'm going to read 3 short poems by Anna and then a very brief piece of mine. Who cycled in 2 fours? 2 fours check trousers, educated in possession of impolite advice, skating, skiering, one's expression luxurious, one's expression relative, the winner in society's book, throws Pink Panther parties, glamorizes a nook. She is flying to Rio tonight. Who views without buying the scarlet bound volume, sculptured linen flowers, hard, empty swimming pools, confuse, desire, the history, poverty. Read poetry with a lot of imagination, indications of personality again, to be lined by, no, there is no one there, and slowly learn to be glad of it. The old plane ride. Who has knocked through these heavens countless times? That skylark's mother was her sister's best friend. There is something to be said about do you think that denigration of the masses, say, leads to their disintegration? Oh, amusant. Who doubts the management? Too few, created aren't we all by the Lord God Almighty single-handed? My clouds, my headache, my mistake. Have you ever? In one of our small conversations, once is better than never and quite different. Secretly, her hat asks to be squashed with its artificial snake, wrapped round the rest of the decorations. To a writer. Without a word, had they not been sealed on fired paper, that the sun was not melting the leaves into fruit? In cleared palm on concrete root, the edges brushed gold, unlicked, dry-lipped in the company of the disrespectful, who suspect law to be shadowed script, dipped onto violet brows, who cut false reliefs to mark it on shoes, pom-poms thrashed apparitions. But I forget how ugly I am reminded by violence, refusing me beauty which I appreciate, and the cool words that flowed in the peace of childhood, far from the hearing of pirates and axemen, finding our bohemian paths overgrown with horses and honeysuckle, alerted the guardians of inexpressivity to hook plump babies onto vacant trees. Have the words been definitively removed, that once my mouth greeted each dawn steadily, attending slow reawakenings that could not be heard, when death was not being offered as dismemberment, in the shocking surfeit of continual appetite, that my arm snapped against the wall, I hid my head and hit it liberally against the unforgiving stone. When weeds grew in luscious streaming water, and the green was cold as the wheat was warm, in muggy fields close shorn by heaven's full blue, hanging heavy in the dense gold of summer's heat. Guilt lies beneath the journeys of the dutiful, clamped into self-denial, rumors of life being lived, rather than the rostrum receiving the stamp of a face. And the third poem is the aptly titled Ordered into Quarantine. You have told me, and in the telling have placed yourself above me as my keeper. This lacks voice positively, though your one word devastated me. I do not, therefore, following you, fill in the space or watch it for, aware of the material nature of this structural existence, which has now become a gratuitous act, falling into exercise, you annihilated me. It is a pity that you took my body seriously. For what fears were yours, I have raced around myself like a maypole in the act of self-strangulation. What a twisted girl you were, you might have sighed, before you popped me into the oven, having broken me over your knee like a long French loaf. But plaited, that calmed me. Any threads in threes. Army blankets fulfilled a purpose, or stars scratched onto a stone floor with the heels of my shoes, or splitting matchsticks with a pin, an economical trick. Who would have thought that that would have proved useful? And to remember it in a chamber airy and unearthly light, if a blue butterfly flew out, I could nip its wing. In one bite, feed on butterfly's wing, by split match light, and all for silence, for the lovely long life of limitless silence, for nothing but wind, sun, and bird song. The day I received I'm Working Here, I wrote a short poem in response, or at least I drafted it. This is called To the Bone for Anna Mendelssohn. Light snow is rising as white ash dances uncoordinated. Obstinately frivolous refuses to coordinate. Ash forgets the pits, dispelling memory for what the present twirls, twiddles, what it buffets, or its flightiest nudge. Ash determines snow, pavement is content to receive. Slush couldn't defile the dance better had it thought to. As more than possible, slush being not so far from thought that will surrept as the bitter night attends to its task. Once more, to freeze the slag, ash must have grazed on. How can slag be broken down, though definitely it must? Every last lost paper docket, bone needle, spots of amalgam. Even ice can't melt with morning's resectioning of day's hard road. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for this event. for everyone who's read, for everyone who's spoken so far. And it's been amazing for me, and it's so amazing to have this book in my hands. And I just want to sort of pay tribute and thanks again, as others have, to Sara Crangle and everyone else who is involved in this work too. But it's such a rare, dedicated act, you know, to put something like this together. It's Anna Mendelssohn's writing has been so important to me, and so many other people here, and to actually have access to this huge tome is just incredible. And this poem that I'm about to read is a bit of a huge tome. I'm going to read one single poem by Anna Mendelssohn, and I'm going to read it because I feel like it's the kind of poem that lots of poets write, perhaps mentally, but never actually actualize. It's the kind of poem that most people don't actually get to finish or complete or to get into the world. It's a searing confession. It's quite hard to read. It's quite hard to even know how to pronounce the title. The title is 1:3NG, so like 1:3N, 1:3N, 1:3ing. It's a really perplexing title. So yeah, please bear with me. I'll do my best. I'm going to raise a glass to Anna as well while we're here. Cheers, everyone. There is this idea that I would not, because of the choking and swallowing, abbreviations, large writing hitting me, and saying nothing. If I were on the menu, to be hitting me with a simple tune, stretching out expressive sighs. The only writer and the only writer too, that is not communication. My waves stopped at me. I present myself to God, who is humorless. He dishonours me wilfully, and it transpires that Althusser has proved useful. Everything is used in this cutthroat world, but what I wanted to write was intact in my mind. I had to share everything, but I did not share my mind. I don't think that everyone does write. I don't think that anything does do. Willfully disobedient people are not necessarily the dregs of society, but they can hate until they die, hate women writers, hate women's minds, have a fright and be obnoxious and conjure up images of power and vote nymphomania. I dip my head in bleach and walk out, pawing the pavement like a wild animal. Nothing is neat. The fangs and the files and the office are a sheet of pearlized lip salve. Oh, how are we going to look flat enough in reinforced boxes with holes for our legs for boating on the bank where the floribunda fluoresce in our spectral eyes? And he looked at my dress and laughed. On birth, he was uncontrollably witty, reliant. Now he represents the patrons as well as the camps, and he soaks his patches in chloroform. When they use society and any old word to dump people into joke camps and unable to muster up any civility, complain of their failure to number everyone, exploiting the insecurity of unofficial art, expecting the same kind of confidence, ripping narrative imagination away from the source to create economic deserts. No, I don't mind dying. Yes, of course, help yourselves. It's not my organisation. They called themselves communists once. They taught Marx. Told you the price of their sweaters, rammed you in the street with their bicycles when you were carrying a newborn baby in your arms. They said they wouldn't be seen dead with you pregnant. Told you to get out of town. To remember in 3, though, when the question was writing not being shaped into a programme, is she a woman? If so, I shall not go to be intrigued. Conscious and dishonest, worse, much worse than any of them, but not a killer, worse because of writing, worse because of there being nothing else. No, nothing. Politicised mediators used to destroy me, anxious that not one survivor should remain, wanted art cleanly dead. They were interested in his impressions. The actual details were no important. He has his supporters. It's almost acceptable. Nothing I composed was acceptable. Not because it was uncivil. He had to have his way. and mediate upon what it must have been like to be cosmopolitan, and change that to cosmopolis, to evade the behind-the-scenes image and rely on laziness, pounding me down into a mortar, to destroy a poem that has haunted the radical imagination. They lap it up, high in from the Broads with a doctored attitude. It's impossible, it's almost acceptable to not go through, to petrify into immobility, to physicalize my imaginative powers of transcendence, to domesticate and mystify, to pull faces behind my back at the well-travelled, to gag me until the unwitnessed moments return, and then smash into my empty purse and hand me out with resurrected snippets of Pound and Eliot. I worry about increased literalism, my own incapacity to distinguish between enemies and friends, the fact that some of my teachers openly espoused fascism, the fact that I did not know what to do about the threats and the swastikas in the post, the fact that I am not allowed to live, the fact that it is easy to use fascist literature to destroy my imaginative power, the fact that the women are waiting to take away my womb, the fact that there are no central climaxes in contemporary music. It's quite difficult to have my minute size beaten into me to the extent that it becomes germane, that the minutiae sold over the counter by the soap opera inclined who hire heavy agents to track down their husbands' heirs, atmospherically testy, tagged by religion and marriages, even the most nightmarish etching ceased to withstand invasion, and obscurity is fired out by memories of basic vocabulary. It was not their position to know what was going on anywhere else. Now they know everything which was going on everywhere else. It wasn't chaos, by the way. It was Socianism. Early Coleridge, the poet, energy engineered into conscience, striking in the service of the inconscient. A few clips from Mass Observation, a body of sadism defining class procreation, enforced sex education, the extremism of abortion, peripheral to the curriculum, simulating life in an artificial environment, assuming dissatisfaction. Blake and Turner, our two strongest artists, strong enough to isolate me from total predation. Does he think that when I read Wheelbarrow, I look for one? Don't raise your voice that grimly children cannot be born. I had to check to bear them alone. Them, no, not them, full and dead. By dead light my mind was infiltrated by the power of malice, tremble, restrained. He caught my air. When I ask you, when I, and only then, for I am the master of all the masters. You were burnt at the stake, and you were paraded before the good, who never mistake right from wrong, who are always present, in full control of their minds. He exists, calls me a Slav, slobbers into his dish, chews each piece, feigns death. For buying a man a drink, a woman was diagnosed as suffering from Alzheimer's disease. The life spring is being cut. If the fathers are not named, the children are removed. Inadequacy. The female literary critics he removed from my shelves. Men were brought in, listened to my analysis of art, repeated it, were fixed up with jobs, watched me moving heavy boxes, deadlines to clear off. Only I find my mind interesting. Only I know the cost of noblesse oblige. Only I am another Irina Ratushinskaya. Only I know the cruelty of denial of the Russian sense of literary space. Only I know which spire I mean. Only I know how the imagination imagination expands, and is gently reminded by physical vision. Only I know how far to value my children's minds and bring them back again to where we are. Only I have to learn them now. Stop searching for them, though this prejudiced arrest. Only I know what was said. His refusal to write through the structure. My lack of experience of anti-culture is devastating effect. Any struggle against death, against these words, weaponry, sharp blades, the usefulness of the crucifixion, hatred of art, well, I should hide from whom I sorrow for, because that wasn't enough for him. His tests. What is it about? They still look. Waste of time to want a 33mm camera whilst he is sweeping the streets and I am involved in unregistered geometrics attached to curves. How that is raised, he makes the session closed open. Each systolic silence infuriates him. I mutter on about bluish bottles in the summer house of a bed and breakfast place. The popular fronts are the key fronts. Most artists left. I mess about, apparently, producing an unfixed line. My perspectives are negligible. I give children time, and time should not be given. It should be taken. It's a skill, I am told, to observe the general march. This is one popular front. If Rimbaud has ever crossed your eyes, note Squint, don't waft him out of the line. He wants to be drawn in, gradually, every time. This makes no sense. I don't want to draw a portrait, don't want to give him any more of my time. It's gradual absorption into legitimacy. A straight, slightly angled vertical line, magnetic north. Amen. Marigold, wasp, and marmalade. You, Rowan, go on, keep talking. It will be taken down and hammered into night. Nothing has to be. The smoke is a chimney sweeper's brush poked through an organ pipe. Lazy daisy, what kind of papers? Specify. Admit to ignorance. I am held in sexism. It was not a conviction, it was a sentencing. The issue was my writing, not theirs. Theirs was the rational cover. The issue was, how could I be disposed of suitably for knowing how tired the people were, and neither death nor abortion were on my reading lists? Where does Immanuel Kant refer to sexual intercourse? The cups and saucers are replaced before the coffee reaches them. She has annihilated the stony stare of anaesthetised breakfasts by suddenly being hungry one morning out of 10 and knowing that he can take the piano between 3 and 1. She was a pianist once. She played wherever she was without one. It's similar cinema 1 to 3, magnetic north 3 past 1. We were playing minuets. They don't like us. The art teacher objected to organicism. They drove through the lines. Some music is social and mine isn't, because it had no willing fathers. Don't you know their hatred? I can only speak to them within the supervising authority's presence. They said that they were only interested in money, and I had none. You didn't understand our reticence. I smoke to kill my voice, to never sing, and to show no joy. Only to find that the words which come out of my mouth have to be checked and checked again. I so much disagree. I so don't want to be read by people who play war games, or don't allow poems to drift out of their windows instead of turning them into mechanical birds who fly around electric jungles. I can hear what is being done. Another bird is about to die, leaving a wired frame. He doesn't care. Realism like his is the ultimate nihilism. He invents anything. I'm not going to stand there and tell him how my coloured pencils were taken and I was given a sewing machine. How I broke down, unable to make my voice into words that were wanted to fill in the lines. They wear stars on their jackets, laugh down the phone, confident of their scenario bureau, but not the stars which that were cut and sewn to form fountains of hot dust. Covering clubby that went, past the orphanage, penetrating psyche took over, information. Don't pretend that you went through what others went through and then turn around and accuse me of being unsympathetic, because a load of refuse is being built up and tagged reality? I refuse to answer. It's too serious for poetry. Artists do not go in to others' lives, not with social science. It is not art, and it is not new. A grown infant with a method. I lost because my voice was too soft. He has screamed at me again. To close my wings of words, afraid of the light. When people are kind to my mind, I respond thankfully. It was hard for me to leave. White merges separately. I excuse myself for refusing to refer to country. Misattribution is enough to torture a writer forever. And I am tortured. I am taught. The spinal nerve becomes numb. I don't have to act, truth. I didn't have to act then, which is why I realised what had been done to Prynne, the mind and the university. They're diabolical. I couldn't understand their lack of appreciation. I was sent to Coventry by them. Do you understand? I shouldn't have been left to cope with them. They were not later the father of my children. I don't understand why women have to be so servile, why everything has to be taped, named, known. I feel gashed down the entire length of the left side of my body, a jagged, nasty gash cut through by a rotary stainless steel blade, a giant CD spinning a fast cut through my dire life. And I am about to sit down to translate Giselle Placino's La Table de Famille, 14th of August, 97, Cambridge, England.